Hello, everyone. Today, my research colleague Mohammed and I will be presenting our non-trivial project titled A Predictive Framework for Addressing Neglected Humanitarian Crises.
To start, I want to talk about a critical issue in the humanitarian sector, the problem of neglected crises. We've all seen the headlines and donation appeals for major global events, but for every crisis that captures the world's attention, there are many others that are just as severe but that are largely ignored due to low media coverage, political neglect, or simply donor fatigue. We call this the response bias. A stark real-world example from 2023 is the difference in funding between the Ukraine appeal, which was 89% funded, and the Horn of Africa drought. Despite having a similar severity, the drought appeal was only 34% funded. This isn't just a funding gap, it's a deadly one. People in these underfunded crises are 40% more likely to die from preventable causes, like malnutrition and disease. The core problem is this. The current systems can predict if a crisis will be severe, but they cannot predict if it will be ignored. Our project builds a model to quantify and predict this neglect, helping to direct aid where it's most needed, not just where it's most visible.
And this leads us to our primary research question. Can we create a mathematical model to predict which severe crises will be ignored by the international community and other organizations? And to answer this, we broke it down into several key sub-questions. First, we needed to understand what factors like death tolls or displacement numbers are the best predictors of a no response. And then we investigated how external factors like media coverage and the speed of funding change that expected response. And then finally, we aim to determine the specific point at which the gap between the crisis severity and the attention received becomes a reliable signal of neglect.
So, why does this response bias exist? As I mentioned, some crises occur in remote areas with poor infrastructure, or under governments that are hostile to major donors. Others are simply overshadowed by bigger events in the media, leading to what's known as donor fatigue. Donor fatigue is a real phenomenon, where individuals and even governments become less willing to donate, often because the crisis has been going on for a long time without visible improvement, or because they are simply overexposed to appeals. The stark contrast between the funding for Ukraine and the Horn of Africa drought is a perfect example of this bias in action. Our goal is to flag crises that are likely to fall victim to this bias early on, identifying those at high risk of future neglect.
To build a predictive model, we first needed a clear, measurable definition of neglect. We define neglect as a significant negative deviation between the response a crisis should receive based on its severity and the response it actually receives. And to measure this, we built a baseline linear model that predicts an attention score based on a severity score. The neglect for any given crisis is then its standardized residual. Essentially, the statistical measure of how far the actual attention is received was from what our model predicted. And a large positive residual means a crisis is severely underfunded relative to its need, and that gives us the real-time neglect score.
We believe this work is important because even small improvements in how we recognize and respond to these crises could save thousands of lives. The problem is tractable because the necessary data severity indices from Inform, funding data from OCHA is already being collected. And finally, it's a neglected area of research. No existing tool synthesizes these inputs into a forward-looking neglect forecast, which highlights a critical gap that our work aims to fill.
We also have to consider the problems with current severity frameworks. Most indices, like the Informed Severity Index, use fixed weights to combine many indicators into a single score. This can hide important details. So our approach, in contrast, uses the raw indicators, allowing our model to learn the specific weightings that matter for each context. We also know that media and donor dynamics, like the CNN effect, can drive funding away from actual need. So our framework bridges this gap by combining severity data with media and donor signals to create a unified predictive model.
To power our model, we compiled a comprehensive dataset covering around 1,000 crises since the year 2000. We sourced the severity indicators from Inform and ACAPS, funding data from OCHA's financial tracking service, and media from global news APIs. This gave us over 50 variables for each crisis, which we grouped into four categories: raw severity indicators, attention measures, geopolitical context, and engineered interaction terms. Normalizing these features was a key step to ensure our model is consistent and interpretable.
Our methodology started with the baseline linear regression model, and then we found that severity alone explains about 39% of the variance in attention, which confirmed that more severe crises do get more attention, but it also left a lot of unexplained variability. So to build a more powerful model, we used time series analysis and found that severity and fatality rates predict attention with a 2 to 3 month lag. And to refine our predictions, we used lasso regression to select the five most predictive features, and then applied fractional polynomial transformations to capture the nonlinear relationships between severity and attention.
So, what were the results? Our descriptive statistics showed that the average severity score was significantly higher than the average attention score, confirming that in general crises are far more severe than the attention they receive. Our final multivariate model, using just 5 key variables, achieved a near-perfect predictive accuracy, with an adjusted R-squared of approximately 0.98. The key predictors included not just severity, but also factors like press freedom and type of crisis.
These results have clear interpretations. A free press enables a fast international response, whereas absent, crisis worsens. We also found that slow-burning crises like drought struggle to gain attention despite their high need. And the practical implication is that our neglect risk score can help donors and agencies act earlier, improving resource allocation and advocacy for crises that would otherwise be ignored. We do see that there are limitations, such as a lack of private diplomatic data and also geopolitical constraints.